Hello, friends. Welcome to another edition of HPA Global Insights. Today, I welcome my good friend David Ettinger. He is a partner at Keller and Heckman Law Firm, and he is based in Shanghai. David, how are you today?
I'm good, Jeff. Good to see you. It's been a while.
Good, good, good. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Um, for the people that haven't been over to China and met you in person, can you just give us a quick introduction to yourself?
Sure. As you said, I'm with the law firm Keller and Heckman. We are based in Washington, D.C. We focus very much on food and drug, food packaging, a lot of regulatory areas of law. But we opened up our office in China back in 2004. In fact, we just celebrated last year our 20th anniversary. And I've been out here for the last 13 years with a team here on the ground that helps a lot of our clients, multinational companies, startups, come to Asia, help market their products, food, consumer products, health products, of course. And that's a large part of what we're doing here in Shanghai.
All right, very good. Well, congratulations on that anniversary. That's a milestone.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
Before this, just to go off topic a bit, we were talking about China and being there, and I was there 14 years. I left right before COVID, and um, as normal, China just changes a lot. So I'm still connected to China very much with staff and family members still there. Um, but the regulatory system, especially for supplements, is also changing rapidly. And there's always adjustments to the food safety law and the different regulations that affect how companies do business in China with supplements. So with that in mind, let's take a look at like what are some of the recent things that have come across your desk, regulatory wise, that your clients have to pay attention to for, we can just say supplements or nutritional ingredients or, some of the health food type category.
Yeah. So I think one of the things I just want to at least highlight from the start is that if you're doing business in China already or want to do business in China, it's really important, and I can't stress this enough, to keep up with the regulatory updates. It's challenging enough because there is no one place where the authorities put changes or updates in the law. The additional challenge, of course, is that it's in Chinese. So I have several attorneys in my office who literally will spend every day checking for updates and seeing what announcements the authorities may have made. And so I think it's important. You may think you know the regulations today. I may think I know them, but then
Hmm.
tomorrow, next week, there's an announcement that changes. I think I want to just go back a little bit before I talk about the present, in terms of an example of where there was maybe a game-changing moment with health supplements, probably back in 2016 timeframe, when the authorities decided that they would uh, treat supplements and the clearance of supplements, meaning health products, health food products, in a dual path fashion. So most of the time, and I think the most important thing that your listeners should understand, and maybe this is also a good time for me to note that although I am a lawyer, this is not intended to give legal advice, of course. This is sort of educational in nature, and I don't want anything to be as construed as legal advice. Obviously, offline, you can always engage me or another outside counsel. So this is for sort of discussion, educational purposes. I need to preface that under, the code of ethics too. But I will say that most of the questions that are asked when we are asked about doing business in China with, say, health products is what category does this fall under? Is it a food? Is it a novel food? Is it a health supplement? What is it? So that's really the first question that anyone should be asking. What am I making and what do I want to sell? And going back to 2016, the authorities took a system that was already in place, which was the pre-approval, meaning you had to get your health food product registered with the authorities before you can market it in China. And in 2016, they decided to open the door a little bit wider. And instead of just having one pathway, the pre-market registration process, they added a second pathway, which was the notification process. And that process is usually quicker, usually requires less data. So then the question becomes, when can I use the notification process and when do I have to use the registration process? And it typically depends on what you're selling. If you're selling by and large a nutrient supplement like that intended to add vitamins and minerals to a food, and you're marketing in China or importing in China for the first time, you can typically take the notification process route. So that may be a tip off for people listening if they're making that, that it could be easier to get into China through that route if you are making that type of product. Other products that are true health products, have functional foods, they require registration. So in 2017, when those filings notifications started, it was good news for industry. But then, and this is merely moving now to present day, if you look back on the last 7 or 8 years, up until very recently, a few months ago, and I'll elaborate on that in a second, the authorities did not clear through a registration process a single imported health product. Not one. In
Hmm.
fact, I had my team come up with, well, not come up with, but check the data on this, which I found to be fascinating. If you just go back the last 2 years, Jeff, when we're talking about registrations of health foods and notifications, those two pathways, which ultimately will allow a company to sell in China, in 2024, imported products, only 28 received notification clearance, opposed to or compared with 4,300 domestic products were notified and allowed to be marketed. When you look at the registration data, zero imported products passed the registration versus domestic 400. Now, we say pass the registration. What that ultimately means is, again, you're getting approval from the authorities. In this case, it's the state market regulators, SAMR. They will be the ones that you would file with and get that registration or notification through. Um, and it's interesting to see that only zero imported products in 2024 and since 2017, zero. Now the change, the news, the update was this past May, June, and July, where for the first time since 2017, there were five imported products that went through the registration process. So, and those products came from Hong Kong and I believe Indonesia. So still nothing from the United States versus this year alone, 137 domestic registered products.
Yeah,
So
and
you can see, yeah.
sometimes I'll just add on there real quick. Sometimes you'll see if you're going into domestic news and you look at Chinese news for these to gather this information, you'll see that they'll say something like, oh, 40 something or 50 something international, brands this year. But if you dig a little deeper, then you see, oh, those are not new registrations, those are renewals. Because again, these things are only good once you register. They're only good for 5 years. You got to renew it. So sometimes they'll include those as what looks
Mhm.
to be a new registration, but it really wasn't. So
That's right.
yeah, those numbers are no joke. Zero for
Yeah.
for for quite a long time.
And for those of the listeners, you can look at a product here in China, for example, and know that it went through the registration process if it has that, as you know, the blue hat logo. I don't have one on me here, but
I'll throw it up on
if
the
you
screen later.
yeah, right. And that's when you know it went through the registration process. So that I think seems to be suggesting that the door is opening now for companies to import products through this process, registration and notification. Um, so that's I think an important update. As we discussed earlier before the call, another I think really great way of coming to China is through CBEC or cross-border e-commerce. And that was a policy, and I emphasize policy, it's not law, and this is very important to understand. That policy came out in about 2017, 2018 timeframe, where the authorities essentially developed a positive list and a blacklist. So one needs to be very careful. If you're going to come to China through cross-border channels, you need to make sure, first of all, you're not on that blacklist, that negative list. Conversely, you want to make sure you're on the positive list. If you are, that's a great starting point to say, I can bring my product through China on one of these international platforms like a Tmall or JD. And we have seen, Jeff, a lot of our clients and companies go that way because it's a great way to test the waters. You know, it's more limited investment. You're not going through a very lengthy registration process. Um, and it gives you a way to see, first of all, if the Chinese consumers like the product. And some of these online platforms like Tmall and JD, they do a very nice job of helping you with flagship stores online to be able to market. You have to be understand though that a couple of things. The first is this is a policy, as I say, not law, which means it can change at any time. And again, that goes to my first point where you really need to be mindful of the changing regulatory environment and understand whether certain announcements stop certain things, certain products. But in the meantime, that's been a pathway that's been very successful for companies. And also understand that this is a pathway where it's for sales, it's personal use sales, which means there is a limit to how much you can sell to an individual via cross-border e-commerce. You just can't send your entire inventory that way, but it's a great way to sell the product. And by the way, I'll also add a lot of our clients are strategic in that they will do both. They will start with CBEC, and then at the same time, they will start the registration or notification process.
Mhm.
And then, of course, what happens if you get that blue hat logo, not only can you come in through CBC, but you then can enjoy putting your products on all the shelves in all cities in China once you get that blue hat logo. So it gives you the best of both worlds.
Yeah, that's an important point you made there about it being not kind of legal doctrine because there's always been that threat. Maybe once every year or a couple of years, there's been like, oh, cross-border e-commerce is going away, and they're going to crack down on it, and this and that, and then nothing ever happens. But there are adjustments. I think most notably is in live streaming as part of this digital entryway to China using cross-border e-commerce to China. There's, well, how do you market to the consumers? And so you start looking at all those digital pathways to do that. And live streaming was one of those that has kind of blown up. And we've seen more scrutiny on that because some live streamers just saying all kinds of crazy things to get people to buy it. And this is a very long discussion that we could do it another time, but it just the way that the consumers were kind of trained, if you will, like how this industry entered into the China market back in the probably late 90s or so. It just came in through the pharmaceutical companies. So from that
Right.
point forward, a lot of consumers, especially the older ones, looked at supplements as a type of medicine. And so to get them to buy it, they wanted these really strong claims. Someone saying, "Hey, buy this bottle and it'll cure cancer," or something like this. So yeah, have any of your
Well,
clients have come
uh,
up against that?
yeah, I mean, your timing is actually perfect. I had my first real life example of that about a week ago with live streaming. And I think that's a great point that you're raising because China has some very unique and great marketing technologies, live stream being one of them with KOLs. And we had a situation where our client brought a product into country and then wanted to market through live streaming. And the individual on the live stream was making these statements like the number one selling product and had in the background, number one product, best of, and all
Wow.
of these hyperbole statements. And the local authorities notified the multinational company and called them into their office. And so now we're in the process of looking at that. So the takeaway there is that anything you are giving to a live streamer must be very well scripted, and it must, of course, comply with the regulations and making sure you're not making these statements. The
Mhm.
authorities crack down on very specific things, and claims are probably one of the most important things because it's just right there. It's on the label or it's on a live stream, as you point out, and it's a very easy thing to monitor. So I would say that a lot of our clients, they go through this, or I should say, companies go through the process of getting a registration or through CBC and dealing with platforms and are not necessarily as mindful as they should be about those claims until, of course, we advise them that this is something you need to consider. So, on that point, when you talk about health supplements, there are very specific claims that can be used. In fact, right now, the number is 24 claims for a functional food that you are marketing and selling in China. In fact, it went from 27, looking down because I have a list of the claims right here. It went from 27 claims to 24. They actually cut back and removed three of them and modified most of them. I'll give you just one or two examples because I think it'll give the listeners an idea. So, one claim that is permitted, once, of course, you go through the right process and get your product either registered or notified, is antioxidant or aids in improving memory or alleviating eye fatigue. Those were the previous claims. What the authorities have done now, they've added the simple word aids in. So, aids in antioxidation, aids in improving memory. So it's just really important that people understand that if you've got a label that doesn't have the aids in it in this particular example, that is a violation. The claim has to be exact and it can't anyway stray from what the 24 are. Likewise, the three that were removed, boosting lactation, promoting growth and development, improving skin oilness, those three have been removed. So if you're not keeping up with the regulations and your product still has that, it's a violation. So the claims are super, super important.
Yeah, and let me just go back to something you said earlier about keeping up on the regulations. And this goes to that point there you just mentioned, but also I just tell a quick story about a company that had an end cap kind of display, cardboard, one of those cardboard like POP type things you put together and put the product in it, and it had marketing and the name and all that stuff. And it was an older POP they had that their distributor ended up recycling and using at a pharmacy or something like that. So it was like almost 2 years old, but the wording on it was caught by the local authorities as, illegal, and they got in a lot of hot water and had to, end up paying a stiff fine for that, just because it was something, no one really thought about and it was just kind of out there. Um, but
That's
yeah,
right.
those things are so important to stay in touch and stay on
Yeah.
top of things.
And I also want to be clear, while we're talking about claims on that label about that health product, that's one thing. There are advertising claims that go beyond that. So I think the takeaway here is that if you're going to make a claim that your product is number one in, even we've seen number one in Switzerland or number one in the United States, those claims are made to help, promote the company. Those can be okay, but you have to make sure that these claims are properly substantiated. I can't tell you how many times we've had those phone calls where the authorities question that, and it's resolved by giving them the right data. But if you don't have that data, you have to be very careful. And this is under advertising laws, but it's an easy thing to miss. And I think and it can be very damaging to the brand, very damaging. Again, going through all that hard work, collecting safety data and the registration process, and then to kind of get it wrong with a claim or going beyond, or it can be, and then, companies tend to can use puffery and try to, but you got to make sure in China that it's all within the four corners of what's permitted.
Hmm. And do you find that China in general, for those that have never been there or kind of understand the overall scope of what China is, um, so China, of course, has provinces, and each province is almost like its own little kingdom to some degree,
Right.
in terms of following the law or how they interpret the law. And we've come up against this quite a bit with, especially with importing. One port could let something in, no problem. and then you ship it to another port the following month and they confiscate it. Do you find that China is much more different than America in terms of, how America states individually would deal with companies compared to how provinces do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's definitely something that we have learned over the years that, the local authorities, whether you're talking about the customs, a lot of these issues arise when, as you say, you're bringing product into port.
Mhm.
And then GAC, which is the General Administration of Customs, these are usually the individuals who will raise the questions. These are when general counsel and regulatory individuals in the company get the phone call because product was stopped at port. And one of the big differences is that China inspects and tests much more so than the United States, much more so.
Mhm.
You can bet almost every shipment will be tested in some regard. They have their certain favorites depending upon the product category. Maybe they'll test for heavy metals, maybe they'll test for microbials, but testing or they'll look at the label. It can be things like the font size on the label is not right. So there's definitely checklists that they have, and this might be a good time to remind your listeners or that China has what we call GB standards, school bow, and everything, virtually everything has a standard. So what I always advise and explain to people who want to do business here is find out what is the applicable standard or standards for your product. It could be light bulb standard, it could be a diaper standard, it could be a health product standard. And I say that because, first of all, it's an easy search. You can find out which ones apply. You can get them translated, and then those documents, which by the way are not necessarily very long, will act as a checklist for you, and they should because they will act as a checklist for the authorities. So the authorities will at customs, the local authorities will look at that. And if there's something not checked off properly, that's when you get that phone call. And you're right, the local authorities have discretion to interpret, and they will interpret things that may be different from the next port in the next province. And we deal with this all the time. And sometimes that's just a question of going in and educating. Sometimes it's a question of, I'll give you an example. They'll say the protein count is off. And we'll say, okay, we do see it's off by X%, but hey, did you know that there's a margin error of plus or minus, say, 3%, if that's the case here? And then go in and sit down with the authorities. So the only setback to that is that can be time and money while your product is stuck at port.
Sure.
So it is important to understand what ports are focusing on what, and to make sure. And if you have a port where you've sent it through and it goes through, that's probably a port you want to stay with because they know your product, they know your company, versus going into multiple ports, which might trigger different interpretations.
It's kind of like whack-a-mole.
It
Um,
can be.
yeah,
It can
sometimes
be.
it can be for sure. So we have members as the association, and you have clients. So that kind of leads us to the conclusion that there is a way to do business in China. It's not impossible, and people are
Right.
doing it. They just need to go about it smartly. And I typically recommend companies, regardless of size, try to have at least one person in your company that is, if you don't have a foothold in China and an office, have someone on your team that's their responsibility is dealing with the China business because it's
Absolutely.
a full-time gig and it's a lot of work. And that's where, associations like us and law firms like you come into play and help companies out with that in mind.
Yeah.
What does your law firm offer for, I guess we should just define this before we go into it. So in China, the Chinese language, they call these things what we call dietary supplements, health food products. And it can be a very broad category depending on how you look at it, but it's not, we have food supplements, nutraceuticals, dietary supplements. Is, around the world, things are kind of, there's a lot of different terms. Dietary supplements seems to be the go-to for the rest of the world when you're speaking English. But so health food products is the kind of technical term for these things.
That's
What
right.
does your law firm offer health food product companies when they're trying to
Yeah.
get into China?
I'll answer that. I just want to go back on one quick point that you
Oh,
made
sure.
in terms of doing business here. I think it's also important to have someone on the ground, like a very good distributor, Some distributors really understand, they keep up with the regulations. It's a good idea to come to China once or twice a year if you can, to meet with those distributors and have a good understanding of how they're selling your products, where they're selling your products. So that's a really important. If you're not going to have physical, presence on the ground, to be working with a distributor who or importer who understands. So asking those questions about the regulations, if they don't know the answers, you may want to find someone who does, because there's some very good ones, and then there's, like anything else, not some good ones.
Yeah, that's a great
Um,
point. Great point.
yep. So you can do business in China without physically being here, but at least you should come and be here, once a year, twice a year, and again have someone good on the ground and have communication on a regular basis. As far as what we're doing for companies, it could be, it's when we're talking about the health products, health food side, we are evaluating what the best pathway is. I would say a large percentage of the time clients will choose to go the CBEC route. So at that point, we will introduce them to platforms and also give them some advice on, even though CBEC is a more flexible procedure, there are things to be mindful of. For example, you still need a Chinese label on that platform. So, we'll help with making sure that label is compliant. You need to know that you can't be on the platform unless it's already legally sold and marketed in your country of origin. So we'll go through some of the steps to make sure that they're even eligible. Like I said, are they in the positive list or on the negative list? Are they even eligible for CBC? And then help with some of the steps that allow you to move in that direction. Otherwise, it's going on the notification and registration pathway. And I'm going to be honest with you, it's been incredibly, as the numbers suggest, or the no numbers suggest, it's been incredibly frustrating over the last 7 years to try to help companies get a blue hat, because if you're importing it, because the authorities essentially froze that pathway. So, we've notifications have been a little bit better, but it's been very frustrating for companies. So what I would say is it seems to be a new day in that there is this door opening for imported products now. So it's a very good time to test the waters. Where we play, I think, a very important role is when you have a particular health product, as we said earlier, you're going to want to make some claims. So the easy part is seeing what claims can I make, right? Is it on that list of 1 to 24? That's easy. Anyone can do that. But you need to be able to substantiate those claims. And so what we will do is, although we have, and you may know this, Jeff, we have about 25 to 30 scientists that work at our firm. These are chemists, microbiologists, toxicologists. The only thing we don't do is we don't do the actual testing. We don't have a laboratory. But what we do is we help our clients not only introduce them to laboratories, at least recommendations, but also help with these protocols, because there are claims that have been on this list where there's no protocol in China. And by the way, you should know that testing has to be done in China to substantiate the claim. That's an important point. The good news is that the testing is typically cheaper and more efficient, but the requirement will be to substantiate that claim from a report given by a Chinese entity, Chinese laboratory that's approved to do so. And there have been claims, frustratingly enough, that uh, don't have protocols. So we've gone to labs and say, okay, we want to substantiate this claim because we know from testing in the United States, for example, that we can make this claim, but there's no protocol for the lab to do it. So they're literally stuck. They can't move on it. We've seen the protocols finally start to come out now to cover most of these claims. And so we would help them with understanding what these protocols are, to do the testing, and so that the reports can come out so that you can eventually file with SAMR and substantiate those claims. So we do a lot of the preparation of the dossier. And as you can imagine, much of that is a very technical document. So our scientists will draft these safety assessments. Sometimes you have to look at exposure. Sometimes you have to compare the substance to other substances and to their safety, called read across. There's different methods. And so we'll help prepare that dossier, we'll help submit it, and then, of course, deal with all of the post communications, because the authorities almost always have questions.
Sure.
that need to be responded to. So we help from really A to Z on that front.
That's very important. One quick point there, from my experience, we've had members go through that process, and there are some tests that they, on paper, will accept from a foreign entity. But I would suggest that you do everything in China because we've had members take those tests that they've had done overseas in their home country, submit them, and then 6 months later they find out, oh, it wasn't done properly or wasn't done to
Right.
our standard and blah, blah, blah. So then they have to go ahead and do that, run that whole test over again in China, and it delayed their registration process by like almost a year.
Exactly.
So I would, like you had mentioned there, just, get all that stuff done in China. There is the check boxes that they love to have.
That's right.
So get all those ticked off in Chinese and it'll make it a little bit easier.
And China has, depending upon where you fall, they have different testing requirements, some less stated than others. And so oftentimes we can also help and say to the authorities, hey, we don't need to do this testing because of X, Y, and Z reasons, or get a waiver on certain tests. So that's also, you don't want to just necessarily look at that box and say, okay, automatically have to do it. There can be ways to reduce testing, and that's an important role that we play as well.
Very good. Well, David, thank you so much for all your insights and catching up on this topic. I know it's a topic lots of people are interested in learning about and keeping up on what's happening in China. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Jeff. It's been great talking to you today, and hopefully we'll be able to reconnect again in the future.
Definitely. So for those watching, thank you very much for tuning in. I appreciate it. I will have a card at the end of this with David's, picture and kind of contact details. If you have any questions or want to reach out to them, feel free to do so. And with that said, thank you so much again, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Take care, Jeff. Bye bye.